With the release of Dr. No, audiences were given something they've just never seen before. Here you had this suave secret agent that would charm beautiful women into bed, kill in cold blood and transport you to the most exotic locations where all kinds of exciting and dangerous adventures would take place. Bond was the ultimate escapism, especially for that time, and audiences simply loved it. Dr. No immediately became a worldwide hit. It manages to gross $59 million at the worldwide box office off of its $1 million budget. So there was absolutely no doubt that a second Bond novel was going to get adapted. And in this episode we're taking a look at what happened next, and of course I share my full review on the second movie. When President John F. Kennedy publicly stated in a Life magazine interview that From Russia with Love by Ian Fleming was among his 10 favorite books of all time, the novels immediately gained more popularity and became bestsellers. So the producers Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman made the logical choice of adapting From Russia with Love as their second big James Bond movie. It was actually the last film that John F. Kennedy ever saw. Now, since many readers, critics and even the president saw the novel as one of the best, the filmmakers felt only minor changes from the novel were needed. In the book, for example, Bond is up against SMERSH, the Russian counterintelligence. But the filmmakers wanted to avoid any potential political controversies, so they decided the movie would feature the fictional criminal organization Spectre. Spectre was of course already mentioned in the first Bond movie, and besides that it also appeared in the later Fleming James Bond novels anyway. So other than some minor details, the movie became pretty faithful to the original novel. Most of the crew that worked on the first film stayed the same. Once again, Terence Young was the director and Richard Maybaum once again wrote the screenplay. However, John Barry now took care of the score, replacing Monty Norman's Tom and Jerry sound, as I called it in Dr. No's review, which is a major improvement in my opinion. John Barry became pretty closely associated with Bond, and he worked on many of the other future installments. Now, most die-hard Bond fans often say From Russia with Love is among the best of the best in the entire franchise. It's even Sean Connery's personal favorite Bond movie. And how do I feel about this movie? Well, let's have a look at it. The gun barrel sequence we were introduced to in the first movie returned, and it now became a tradition to always open a Bond movie with this gun barrel. And the movie immediately throws us into a tense start as we see Bond snooping around in some dark yard while he's being chased by this big scary blonde guy called Red Grant, played by Robert Shaw. And I really like how they immediately build up tension here. You can tell that something is not right as Bond seems to look scared, and there's the fact that he gets killed immediately. But of course it turns out to be one big Spectre training exercise, and the guy that got killed is just some random dude with a ridiculously convincing Sean Connery mask. And then the movie drops us into the title sequence. And this would also become tradition in every Bond film following. First you would get the gun barrel, then the pre-title sequence, and then the title sequence. And as every Bond fan knows, the title sequence is mainly there to warm us up for the Bond adventure awaiting. You know, you get a lot of half-naked women dancing around, the names of the whole cast, and, you know, all the good stuff. It's just some tradition they always kept in after this movie. So anyway, after the titles we move to Venice, where this chess game is going on with this creepy guy called Kronstein. And it doesn't take much observation to notice that Kronstein is a villain, one that is working for Spectre in fact.
Spectre? Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion.
Yeah, Spectre is the evil organization that Dr. No was also part of, and it features in most of the early Bond movies. And this time we actually get to see the head of Spectre, or, well, not his actual head or name is revealed yet until a much later movie, but we do see his hands and his menacingly stroking his white cat as he lays out his evil plans, or, well, approves the plans that Kronstein makes. Anyway, it's here that immediately the complicated plot kicks in, and unlike the previous movie where the plot was basically an agent got killed 007, go find out who did it, will ya? But here the plot gets slightly more complicated than that, so I'll try to stick with a simplified version here.
Sit down, number 3, while we listen to what number 5 has devised for us.
Okay, so basically Kronstein has devised a plan to avenge the death of Dr. No by luring James Bond into a trap by using a cryptographic decoding machine, or a lector, as bait, because the British Secret Service apparently wanted one of them lectors for ages, so that's why it's used as the bait. And Spectre Agent number 3, Rosa Klebb, which is an old Russian woman, who is also the head of the Russian Secret Service, is put in charge of the operation. So she's basically part of both Spectre and the Russian counterintelligence, if that makes sense. So, she's just one mean, crazy old bitch, that's all you need to know. And in order to make Kronstein's plan actually work, Rosa Klebb has recruited two people. The first one being the assassin from the pre-title sequence, Red Grant, who Rosa Klebb seems to get all horny around.
He seems fit enough. Have him report to me in Istanbul in 24 hours.
And the other one she needs is this movie's Bond girl, Tatiana Romanova, played by Miss Italia Daniela Bianchi, who also seems to kind of turn on Rosa in some way.
Turn around. You're a fine-looking girl.
So Tatiana Romanova is just an innocent Russian woman working in Istanbul at the Russian consulate building, and she doesn't know that Rosa is working for Spectre. So Rosa gives her this assignment, which is to fall in love with Bond, give him the lecter and let him take it back to England with her. And she has to pretend, that she wants to defect to the West. And all she thinks is that she's doing this for Mother Russia, completely unaware that she's actually doing it for Spectre. And if she doesn't obey these orders, then, well...
You will be shot!
So, yeah. Hooray, communism! So that basically explains the whole trap that 007 is supposed to fall into, and meanwhile Bond is banging an old booty call from the previous movie, Sylvia Trent, when Moneypenny calls him to the office, where M basically explains exactly the same thing as I just did, that a Russian girl supposedly fell in love with him and she wants to defect to the West, and they both realize that it's probably a trap, but hey, there's a lector that they can obtain here, so fuck it, Bond, you need to go to Istanbul. But not before he receives some of his gadgets. So here we're introduced to Q, though he's not actually called Q yet, but he's now played by Desmond Llewellyn, who would continue to play the role for years and years to come. So Q gives him a really high-tech gadget, a briefcase, which is so much cooler than that actually sounded, because it contains a throwing knife and a tear gas booby trap if you open it a certain way, and even this attachable sniper rifle. You can really imagine real spies in the Cold War era would have such a cool briefcase as this one. You can already tell that at some stage Bond is eventually going to need it, and that's always really cool.
Good luck.
Ciao.
Ciao.
So Bond heads down to Istanbul and you immediately get sucked into this world of espionage. I mean, there just isn't a Bond movie that gets this authentic Cold War spy feel down as much as From Russia with Love has it. I mean, there are cool spy code lines to see if a person is really trustworthy.
Can I borrow a match?
I use a lighter
It's better still.
until they go wrong.
Exactly.
I'll get the car, sir.
And since Istanbul holds the ground for both the British of the West and the Russians from the East, kind of like Berlin at the time, you have the Russians always tailing the British and the other way around, and it all just adds to the charm of the era. So Bond is assigned to Station T, the T standing for Turkey, and we meet the head of the station, Karim Bey, who is one of the best Bond allies in the series, and he's played by Pedro Armendáriz, who unfortunately had cancer during the filming of the movie, but desperately wanted to film all of his scenes to provide for his family. Which is exactly what he did, and then in the hospital he committed suicide. It's a really tragic background story, but he's definitely a wonderful human being, and he shares some really great scenes with Connery. So in the next scene, Bond goes to his hotel, and despite the movie being really authentic and cool, it's also here that you notice that it's quite dated, as the Bond theme is constantly playing at moments that it really shouldn't.
Thank you, sir.
I mean, all Bond really does here is tip the doorman and look for bugs in his room, and the Bond theme makes it seem like it's a huge action scene. Bond does find that his room is bugged, so requests to move to another room, which is exactly what the villains want. Meanwhile, Spectre is setting up the British and the Russians against each other by killing a Russian agent, which causes tension between the two, so the Russians think that the British are responsible for it and blow up Karen Bay's office just as he is spending some quality time with a hot chick. So Bond comes back to Karam's place, and they obviously are both surprised by the sudden Russian attack because they are supposed to have an understanding truce, not realizing of course that Spectre has caused a war between them. So they decide to have a look at what the Russians are doing by going to an underground sewer that he has access to, and they are able to get directly under the Russian consulate building and spy on them using a periscope, which is actually quite awesome. So they find out that the Russians have hired a guy named Kruyenko, which is a Bulgarian. Basically, the Bulgarians are used as hitmen for the Russians, and Bond also gets a first glimpse at Miss Romanova.
Well, from this angle, things are shaping up nicely.
And that night Bond and Karen visit a gypsy settlement. Basically, Karen uses these gypsies in the same way as the Russians use the Bulgarians. And you get this scene of two hot gypsy girls fighting over some guy. It's pretty much all completely irrelevant to the plot, but you know, I have to admit I always took great pleasure in watching this scene. However, the fight is rudely interrupted by Kruyenko and his gang of Bulgarians, so one big fight emerges between the gypsies and the Bulgarians, and everybody starts shooting each other, and Karam even gets shot in his arm, and Bond almost gets killed as well, but Red Grant actually saves him because he's secretly spying on it all, so he kills a dude behind Bond because, you know, Spectre still needs the Lecter, and thus they still need Bond alive at this point. And eventually the Bulgarians retreat and Karam wants revenge in killing Kruyenko, but obviously Bond does get to bang both of the hot gypsy girls first, and then they set out for revenge. So they use Bond's sniper to kill Kruyenko at a hideout in a really cool scene.
She should have kept her mouth shut.
So back at Bond's hotel in his new room, the bridal suite actually, Bond finally meets Tatjana Romanova in his bed.
You look just like your photograph.
You're one of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen.
Thank you. But I think my mouth is too big.
No, it's the right size. For me, that is.
That's a sex joke, So Bond starts banging Tatiana, and meanwhile behind the mirror Spectre is secretly recording the whole thing. Yup, Spectre. Special executives for candid models, porn, bondage, erotica. And the next day Bond and Tatiana secretly meet up in a mosque, and Tatiana leaves the floor plans of the Russian consulate building so that Bond and Karam can devise their plan to take the lecter from the building, which they do by blowing up a bomb underneath the Russian consulate building, which wasn't used in the novel by the way. And then Bond, Tatiana and Karam escape Turkey with the lecter on the Orient Express. And in the novel it was actually mentioned why Bond and Tatiana took a train back to the West instead of a plane, and it's kind of a shame that the movie doesn't address this too, but oh well. Basically the best scenes in the entire movie all take place on board of the Orient Express. Of course Red Grant also slipped aboard the Orient Express, and you can constantly feel his presence and that danger is at every turn, and it's all just brilliant espionage cinema here. There are some genuine sparks between Bond and Tatiana, and even though we as the viewer know that she is actually used as a pawn in Spectre's plan, these characters don't realize that. Bond is obviously suspicious of something that is going on, but he doesn't know that Spectre is involved in any way. And Karen Bay also shines with another great line when he encounters a Russian agent.
I've had a particularly fascinating life. Would you like to hear about it? You would.
Unfortunately, Karam and the agent both get killed, and we as the audience of course know who is responsible for this, but Bond isn't aware of Spectre at all yet. But even if we as the audience are ahead of Bond, it's still all very thrilling, and that's one of the many things that makes this movie so good. So when Karam gets killed, Bond starts to question Tatiana, and he becomes a bit pissed, which is understandable. He's still unaware of everything. So at the train stop somewhere in Yugoslavia, Bond meets one of Karam's sons and requests him to let M know that he needs backup. But of course Red Grant overhears the whole conversation, so he starts to pose as the man called Nash that M supposedly has sent, and he killed the real Nash. So Bond is completely unaware that Grant is actually a villain, and he and Tatiana have dinner together, and Nash orders red wine with fish, which comes into play a bit later. And he also drugs Tatiana's drink, which Bond does notice, but he keeps his mouth shut and does become a little bit suspicious of Nash, so he starts questioning him a bit later, but Grant manages to talk his way out of it and wins back Bond's trust. Until he catches Bond when he's off guard, and basically Spectre's brilliant plan have succeeded all the way now, so Bond is pretty much fucked.
Red wine with fish. Well, that should have told me something.
Exactly, because which gentleman would order red wine with fish? I mean, come on. So Grant starts explaining the whole plan that we as the audience pretty much already know, but he also mentions the movie of Bond and Tatiana having sex in the hotel and how they plan on using that to humiliate Bond even further. But here's where Q's briefcase comes into play, and Grant falls directly for the tear gas booby trap, and one of the best fighting scenes of the entire series starts, which is very well done stuff. It's mostly Connery and Shaw themselves fighting here, and it's very real and full of tension. We already learned how dangerous Grant is in the pre-title sequence, so things get really tense and it's a highlight of the movie. In the end, Bond uses his throwing knife to stab Grant to death.
You won't be needing this, old man.
And Bond and Tatiana get off the Orient Express at the part where Grant was supposed to get off, and they steal the truck that he was supposed to escape in. And back at Spectre's headquarters, they hear that Grant was found dead on the Orient Express, so Kronstein gets killed for it with a poison-tipped shoe in true Bond villain fashion. And the Spectre goons are ordered to kill Bond, and some action scenes start involving a helicopter and grenades, and it's not really one of the best action scenes in the franchise, but it's definitely a step up from the silly car chase in the first movie. From Russia with Love, after all, had a budget that was double that of Dr. No. So Bond uses his sniper once again to shoot the guy in the helicopter, and he drops his grenade and he explodes. And then Bond and Tatiana escape by boat, and another action scene quickly follows, which is a better one by the way. And Bond uses a flare gun to set off a huge explosion, and there's people who are on fire and panic everywhere, and it's all great. It's very well done stuff here. The film set even had real panic here, because things got out of hand. That's how real all of the stuff here is. It's just cool stuff. And after all that, Bond and Tatiana are safely back into Venice and within the capitalistic borders of the West, so now they're safe, or are they? Yeah, Clapp shows up disguised in a maid's outfit and she wants to take the lector, until Tatiana interferes and a final fight between Bond and Clapp emerges. And Rosa has her poison-tipped shoe and she tries to stab Bond with it, and in the novel she actually succeeds in doing so, as Bond actually does get poisoned and collapses to the floor. But here it's Tatiana who, after some doubts, shoots the bitch down. It's kind of a shame that they didn't go with the original ending like in the novel, but I can perfectly understand a happy ending would be more fitting here.
Horrible woman.
Yes, she's had her kicks.
So Bond and Tatiana are on the canals of Venice, romantically kissing as Bond throws away the poor movie that was made of the pair. Which is a bit silly as he waves it goodbye and stuff. I can do without that one, but oh well. That concludes the movie, and the filmmakers were confident enough to let us know that Bond would return in Goldfinger. So, From Russia with Love. It's often acclaimed to be one of the best Bond movies out there. Do I think that's true? Well, plot-wise it's certainly one of the best in the entire franchise, and yes, it's completely clear to me why people would say that. Is it my favorite? Well, no, although I do rank this one in my lower half of my personal top 10 Bond movies. But From Russia with Love proves to me that one of the best plots doesn't necessarily mean one of the best movies. Now don't get me wrong though, From Russia with Love is indeed one of the best, but it's kind of a pre-Bond formula, if that makes sense. At this point the franchise was still getting into itself. It doesn't have all the elements yet that you might expect from a Bond movie. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. From Russia with Love is an amazingly thrilling spy thriller. As a standalone film it's definitely one of the best, but also as a Bond film it ticks a lot of boxes. I mean, Connery is once again superb in the role, and pretty much all the other main characters are all top notch as well. However, it does have its dated moments, like the fake rear projections and the Bond theme playing in a hotel like I mentioned in this review, but those are all mainly minor things. From Russia with Love remains a widely recognized Bond movie that is often ranked at the top of everybody's list. It might not be at the top of my personal list, but I certainly appreciate what it is, a faithful adaptation of one of my favorite Fleming novels, a great spy thriller and a classic movie.